It kind of feels like that sleeping giant that is Ole Miss football is waking up. We'll tell you exactly how right after this. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and 10-year veteran as a member of the national media at Yahoo. Thank you very much for joining us. Today on the show, we talk about Walter Nolen and Princely Umanmielen visiting and what that means. Hint, it's a good thing. And as I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. We're free and available on all podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Absolutely crazy beginning of this week. And I realize it's Wednesday morning and everybody's been patient with me over the last several days with my mom being in town. But Monday night, my goodness, it was absolutely off the chain with excitement, with the momentum in Ole Miss recruiting. And one of the big players that is going to visit Ole Miss, there's two really gigantic, terrific defensive linemen that are visiting Ole Miss. And we'll talk about Princely Umanmielen in just a second. But right now, I do want to talk about Walter Nolen. Walter Nolen is the defensive lineman out of Texas A&M, and he is due to visit, I think, starting Friday. Could be Thursday, could be Friday. I do not know. This is going to be a big get for Ole Miss. This is the number one player that has probably ever been in the transfer portal. He's visited Oregon. Now he's visiting Ole Miss. We'll see exactly how that goes. If Lane Kiffin can somehow sew this commitment up, it will be an indicator of something very special brewing for Ole Miss football. Ole Miss is in line. They have the top linebacker in the portal. They have a good visit, and we're waiting to hear from the top wide receiver in the portal. The top defensive lineman is Walter Nolen. The pass rusher is Princely Umanmielen. And those players together take Ole Miss to a different level. And that doesn't even take into account even the tight end out of Virginia Tech. I believe his name is Daquan Wright or something like that. If I got that wrong, I apologize, Daquan. But you have a situation to where Ole Miss football is really trending. Carter Smith is still available. Jerquan Scott is still available. That is a potential player. And Lewis Moore, who committed last night. Nobody knew about Lewis Moore. He just committed and he was there. And everybody's like, oh, I need to learn about this guy. Well, it turns out he's a really good player. He's a safety player. Had 3 picks and a pick 6 last year for Indiana. Ended up with like 85 tackles. He's a true safety, an alley safety that Ole Miss can count on. So this transfer portal class is taking Ole Miss potentially to levels that we have not seen. And Walter Nolen is a major key for that. I'll put it to you like this. If Walter Nolen commits to Ole Miss, if Ole Miss can get Walter Nolen, that takes Ole Miss out of the conversation just to make the playoffs. And all of a sudden, Ole Miss is in the conversation to host a playoff game. That is what Walter Nolen can do for your team. And why can he do that? Well, he's the former number 1 player in the country. He's actually originally from Olive Branch, Mississippi. So that's the tie for people going on. And that's the reason Ole Miss probably has at least a puncher's chance in this competition. But you put him next to J.J. Pegues, and Ole Miss potentially has the best defensive line pairing in the conference. You pair all 3 of them with Princely Umanmielen. You have an even better defensive line. And if Jared Ivey decides to come back, which we're still waiting on information on that, if he comes back as a strong side defensive end, you might have the best defensive line in the Southeastern Conference. And you have recruited in the high school ranks about the number 3, number 1, number 2, depending on the service, defensive line class in the country. This is why Walter Nolen's important. Ole Miss could walk into this year, or 2024, I should say, not this year because there's still a Peach Bowl game left to be played, with the best defensive line potentially in the conference. And that's with Georgia, that's with Texas, that's with Oklahoma, that's with LSU, that's with Alabama. Doesn't matter. You add those players and the players that are being recruited, and you have something really, really special brewing in Oxford, Mississippi. This is why Walter Nolen is important. Walter Nolen makes your defensive line scary. Your defensive line was actually pretty good last year. If you're an Ole Miss fan and you were looking at, defensive line was pretty good. Jared Ivey was good. JJ Pegues is good. Cedric Johnson was good. And you had like the Stephon Wynn, the Josh Harris, the Xavion Harris. And Xavion Harris, by the way, is going to be back. But if you get Walter Nolen and you have a front four, okay, of Princely Umanmielen, like I said, if I'm butchering that name, I apologize, Princely. JJ Pegues, because he's good enough to start no matter who comes in. Walter Nolen, and then Jared Ivey at the defensive end. That defensive line puts fear in the offense. That defensive line is worried about having to double team both JJ because of his athleticism and Walter Nolen because of just how good he is. And all of a sudden, those ends, Princely's getting one-on-ones. Princely's getting chipped by running backs. That is why this is important. That is why this commitment, if Ole Miss can get this, would take them to the next level. We're talking about just with Princely and Walter Nolen, Ole Miss is a top 5 fringe team. Just them. That's not including Carter Smith, Juice Wells, any of these other players that Ole Miss is going to play in those markets too. They're going to swim in those ponds. Just those 2 players, Ole Miss is a top 5 fringe team for 2024. We're talking home playoff conversation. Because the offensive line, we're going to talk about Micah Pettis is coming back. You have to replace Victor Kern, but you have Jaden Williams at tackle that can play that position as well. You need somebody on the interior. You're recruiting Jerquan Scott. That looks pretty promising as well. And then at the wide receiver position, Trey Harris, he's coming back. Just like we talked about yesterday as a possibility. I know it's schedule-wise, it can be weird. There's always stuff that's going to happen after my show records. There's not really a lot I can do about that. I'm not going to be a person that keeps re-recording his show. We're just not going to do it. I'll just talk about it the next day. But Trey Harris is coming back, potentially the best wide receiver in the Southeastern Conference. Put him up on the other side of Deion Smith, who is going to come on competing for the best wide receiver in the Southeastern Conference. Caden Prieskorn is coming back as well. That is a major factor running the football. And every time I talk about players that are coming back, Ole Miss announces another one. So I'm going to bring them up today, and we're going to talk about that in the third segment just to see how lucky that is. But Walter Nolen, this is a big piece. This is the biggest name that has ever hit the transfer portal, and Ole Miss has a legit shot at this athlete. Really, really good player. It just genuinely feels like Ole Miss football is going all in for 2024. So, fans, we need to enjoy this year. We don't need to set back with fears and petty things like that. We need to enjoy this year. Anyway, when we come back, we're going to talk about Princely Umanmielen. So if I got that wrong, I apologize. Ole Miss has all the momentum in the world right now. This is exceeding 2013 and 2016. We'll talk about Princely. We'll talk about other players that are kind of in the periphery at the moment as well. But right now, I do want to let you know that as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. We're going to get really into lines and all that as the game with Penn State and the Peach Bowl gets closer. They'll start to become more of a factor in our coverage of the game, but right now it's so early, it just kind of doesn't make sense to do that. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so Walter Nolen isn't the only major name that is being associated with being on campus. Earlier this week, I believe it was yesterday, Princely Umanmielen visited the campus. And Princely, him visiting Ole Miss, big deal. We talked about him. Heck, we were the only one out on that ledge Friday or Thursday. Honestly, Thursday night, we talked about that. We did a video last Friday on Princely and what he would mean to Ole Miss. And all of a sudden, it just percolated. And now all of a sudden, everybody is talking about it. And it's such a big deal. And there's that sense of pride that comes with that. And we don't break a lot of news on this show. We don't try to break news as part of the reason for that. But sometimes it just kind of finds us. And it'll be really interested to see what happens on campus and things like that. But really, really good player. Princely, last season, 39 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, and 7 sacks as a Florida Gator. I think he was a second-team All-SEC type player. Really good football player and possibly the best pass rusher in the portal. And this is a big deal. If you talk about how important Walter Nolen is, it can't be overstated how important Princely is as well, because that defensive line is going to be important. When people looked at the Georgia game last year and they saw what happened in that football game, they're like, okay, Georgia won offensive line against Ole Miss's defensive line, and their defensive line beat our offensive line. So those are the two areas that Ole Miss needs to get better at. With the addition of Walter Nolen and Princely Umanmielen, you have a chance to kind of fix that defensive line, to be ready to go, especially with the players that you're bringing in with such a highly rated class. I mean, William Eccles, the rumor is he canceled his Alabama visit. And this is another player that Ole Miss has beaten Alabama on. So William Eccles doing that. Now, there's other pulls on there. I think his mom is a poster actually on Inside the Rebels and said there's nothing to worry about here. But people are going to worry about Alabama during recruiting, man. You're probably smart to do that. But if you look at Princely and Walter Nolen, if you pair those together, you were talking just a massive top 5 level football team for Ole Miss, period. No other names are necessary. Others are going to come. No other names are necessary. Ole Miss was a 10-win team, and now you just increased the defensive line to the point where they were fairly good defensively last season. They essentially held 6 of their 12 opponents to under 300 yards. Mississippi State had 304, so I'm counting them in that category as well. Now, Georgia and LSU and the elite offenses they played, they kind of had their way. Even Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M kind of figured some stuff out, and in the second half, he was able to kind of go. But if you were a bad or a mid offense, Ole Miss last year feasted on you, period. Now, if you're going to be a little bit better defensively, instead of that happening to 6 teams, you're looking at that happening at 8 or 9, where the defense just kind of just suffocates the offensive unit, because that's what happened multiple times this season. The defense just suffocated the offensive unit. And then you add Walter Nolen and Princely, and that's something that it can absolutely happen again. Can absolutely happen again to more teams, because that talent gap is going to increase. Ole Miss is going to start to do to teams what LSU does to teams, what Alabama does to teams, what Georgia does to teams. When that talent area gets to that level, you're going to see those types of results. Now, I'm not saying you can't lose a game. Alabama and Georgia loses games. But getting to that talent is the goal, especially if you're one of these person that it's not the X's and O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. If you're one of those, you want to get to that talent level. Now, you need the X's and O's too, because that is what really separates somebody like Georgia and Alabama with somebody like LSU, with somebody like Tennessee, where it's kind of up and down because they get the elite coaching with the elite players. So it should be pretty interesting with that. So listen, I don't remember in my lifetime recruiting being at this level for Ole Miss football. I don't remember recruiting being at this level. And it's because of the Grove Collective. They are completely right now going all in with retention and doing everything that's necessary there. And they're also doing things with acquisition that's very important. Walter Nolen being on campus, the Grove Collective are going to have their turn. Princely Umanmielen, the Grove Collective is going to have their turn. They had their turn with Carter Smith. They had their turn with Juice Wells. The Grove Collective has done honestly everything we've asked for, right? As a fan, the Grove Collective has done what we've asked. Coming up to the Christmas season, I hate to be the guy necessarily, but $21 a month is the lowest level to get in. I mean, something's better than nothing. And Walker Jones was on our show talking about how those memberships and that money allows him to plan out the future. So go to the collective, sign up if you can. If not, that's okay too. But the collective does a fantastic job. And I mean, everybody's kind of rallying around them at the moment anyway. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment, honestly. So still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Listen, this week has been absolutely nuts with all the players coming back that we didn't know that we were going to get, all of the acquisition targets. The Grove Collective is having a week. And we talk about exactly how that will look and what that means in just a second. But right now, I do want to let you know today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top-tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right teams for your team faster and for free. It's so important to hire the right guy. It's also so important to fire the right guy. And if you hire the right person for your staff, they just have a quality and they improve your team so much. Like if you hire the right football coach, in 3 or 4 years, you could find yourself in the discussion for the playoffs. If you hire the wrong coach, you could be right back here doing this again. LinkedIn just isn't just another job board. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals that makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many candidates. So easy, in fact, that 80% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. And LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that you may not have the time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a new feature that helps you write these job descriptions that make the process even easier and quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. So one thing that I like to talk about a little bit is like, this feels different. This all feels really different. And we'll get to that in just a second. But I do want to give a shout out to Micah, Pettis, and Trey Harris, who came back to Ole Miss. I'm usually been about a day behind on these, and I honestly put these up today because everybody, I assume, knew that was going on. But every time I put these up and I talk about players coming back, somebody else gets added to the mix. And we're still waiting on Jackson Dart, Quinshon Judkins, although there's no real place other than the transfer portal that Quinshon can go. And also Jared Ivey. And Jared Ivey is quietly a major piece going on, but with all the players coming in, it should be interesting to see. So we're going to pay attention to Jared. We're going to pay attention to Jackson Dart. We're going to pay attention to Quinshon Judkins and all of the players that are on campus. Again, Trey Harris is potentially the best wide receiver in the Southeastern Conference. We all saw what he did against Texas A&M. We all saw what he did against LSU. He appeared against good defenses. He showed out. If he gets off against Penn State's going to have a long day. Trey Harris is an elite wide receiver, and having him coming back to Ole Miss is a major, major deal. He only played, 9 games or something like that. 8 games. He missed nearly a quarter of the season because of injury. Micah Pettis is currently injured. Kind of makes sense with the broken ankle, him coming back for another year, but that helps the offensive line a little bit as well. Ole Miss played Georgia without Micah Pettis. Everybody likes to rail on Micah Pettis, but Micah Pettis is one of the better offensive linemen that Ole Miss has. Ole Miss has to go find some other pieces as well, but Micah Pettis is kind of a road grader and really good in the run game as well. So we'll see exactly what happens with him. Now, it's really interesting what's going on around Ole Miss football right now, especially early in the week. Monday night was nuts. Monday night was insane. And I have not seen momentum around Ole Miss football like that in a very long time. And everybody's going to say, what do you mean by that? Are you just people talking about it on it? It's like, no, that's not exactly it. That helps. The fans being completely bought in, that helps. So don't hear me discount what they're doing. But Ole Miss is in the process of reshaping their signing class because of the directions that Ole Miss they're taking right now. Ole Miss they got committed a lot of high school players because Mississippi is having a really good high school year. So like Jeremy Scott and San Francisco McGee and those players all committed to Ole Miss. I think Raji Dennis committed to Ole Miss as well. A couple of wide receivers came in. They were 3-star wide receivers, but they're all wide receivers that had good ceilings that they all evaluated very highly. Not bad mouthing the kid at all. The kids they're really good football players. The difference is what happens with Juice Wells? Whose spot does he take? Ole Miss has cleared some room in the wide receiver room right now between J.J. Henry, Braylon Brown, Raji Dennis, San Francisco McGee, and Jeremy Scott. Those players have all been moved. Why? That is because of everything that is happening in recruiting. Let me bring this up. This is the crystal balls, the latest crystal balls from 247. Princely has a crystal ball. Ole Miss did get a commitment from Lewis Moore, so that one was correct. Jerquan Scott, who could be announced by the time you watch this. Key Lawrence, they're still waiting on him as well. Corey Thornton, who is from UCF. I do not know much about him, so we'll kind of pay attention this weekend if he visits. I think he's visiting this weekend with Walter Nolen and a couple other players. Anthony Maddox, who Steve Wiltfong has flip-watched from Texas A&M to Ole Miss, is a quarterback from Oak Grove. Juice Wells is crystal balled, and Kewan Lacey. That list right there is as good as any 10-player list that Ole Miss has ever signed. ever. So when I talk about the momentum and they're early in the week and how it is picking up, I'm talking about this just as much as I'm talking about fans going absolutely nuts, because fans are going absolutely nuts as well. That hasn't changed. But these players, and there's going to be some potentially more added. We don't know about Carter Smith. We don't know about a couple of different players, and we'll see exactly how they go. But as this says, this feels different. This feels completely different than what we're used to at Ole Miss near signing day towards the end. It feels like the staff is getting ready to really close, both in the transfer portal, which the Portal King's a thing for a reason. He's really good in the transfer portal, but also with having the high school players at a higher level. Everybody should be excited about Kiwan Lacey. We talked about him in yesterday's show. Really good running back. Everybody should have seen the highlights by now. But if you look at that list right there, if Ole Miss gets those lists, let's say all those crystal balls are correct, okay? Just those, no more. Ole Miss is a national championship contender. Just those. That's not me blowing smoke. That's not me doing anything like that. That's me being real with the talent that is coming back that won 10 games this season, the schedule being a lot more favorable next season, and all of a sudden you're going to add playmakers all over the field, upgrade in certain positions that were already strengths. If you do that, you have a chance to be really, really good. Lewis Moore, by the way, is my prediction for next year's Dejon Anthony, by the way. Should be really good. But I am unbelievably fired up about what's going on in recruiting right now for Ole Miss football. Absolutely amazing. We're going to have some extras in the course of the week. We're going to have Tim Thomas. We're going to have as many people as we can get. Like I said, because my mom came into town and stuff like that, our schedule kind of got thrown off. We're going to get everything back on. By next week, we will be good to go. Appreciate the patience with everybody. Everything's a little bit later. I'm not paying attention to everything the way that I normally do because I wanted to spend time with my mom. So thank you also for watching Shark Tank Live. We'll do that as well as we're all reacting to this week. I'm looking forward to this episode as well. So we'll see exactly how that goes. We may live stream a couple of times this week, depending on what happens. Like if Princely commits, we'll live stream. If Walter Nolen commits, we'll live stream. If Juice commits, we'll live stream. So that, just be patient for the remainder of this week, and we'll see exactly how all this goes as well. Pretty fired up indeed. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. Every day as we're about to start our game prep with Zach Sako of Locked On Nittany Lions as we look at our Peach Bowl prep for both sides. We start that tomorrow. For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. For those on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy.